So hello, Parit, and thank you for joining us in the context of the OECD Southeast Asia Regional Forum on Human Capital Development. And you are a very interesting speaker in this regard because you're Thai, but you were educated mostly in the UK, in Eton and Oxford. And during your career, you've already worked at McKinsey, ran as a candidate for Member of Parliament for Thailand's Democratic Party. And now you're the CEO of StartDee, which claims to be the Netflix of education, which you will hopefully explain to us in a minute. Yes, and before we start, I'd also like to say congrats, since it's going to be your 1-year anniversary tomorrow with StartDee. So let's dive right into this. So can you tell us, what is StartDee? How is it the Netflix of education? How did your perspectives during your career from the different roles I just mentioned lead you to start StartDee? And also specifically looking at Thailand's education system, which gaps did you identify and how are you filling them?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Caroline, for the invitation and the question. I think just to begin with, StartDee is essentially an education technology startup that aims to democratize access to high quality learning content using world-class technology. What we essentially do is we develop a mobile application that allows students across grades 1 to 12 to be able to access high quality learning content, whether in the form of videos, quizzes, or problem sheets across key subjects in their schools. So we launched around this time last year in the midst of the COVID crisis. And after 1 year, we now have about 700,000 students across the country that have downloaded and tried learning through our application. We are a team of 100 people in Thailand, but we are actually part of a larger group across Southeast Asia. Our oldest and founding partner is actually a company called Ruang Guru in Indonesia. They have been around for quite a few years, and they have developed into the largest education technology platform in ASEAN. And together as a group, we have delivered education services to over 20 million students. Now, if you ask kind of personally why I decided to embark on this journey, it comes from the belief that I have that getting a good education can really transform people's lives, both at a personal level in terms of opening people up to new opportunities, as well as at a structural level. If you want the country to improve or to grow both economically and socially, I believe that a good quality education is a key driver for that. I mean, if you want the country to grow economically, you need to have a good education system to equip people with the right skills. If you want to reduce the country's level of inequality, you need to make sure that every child or all children can access the same high level of education. So I mean, that's why I believe that we need to make sure that access to high quality education is available for everyone. But if you look at Thailand, you realize that that's not the reality yet. So getting a good quality education in Thailand is still something that not everyone can access. And I believe that there are 3 key kind of walls or barriers that is preventing that. Firstly, it's fair to say that the general level of quality of education in Thailand lags behind other countries. I mean, compared to other countries in the world, our students spend the most number of hours in schools, but every time PISA rankings come out, where they measure the skills of primary and secondary school students, Thailand always comes quite near the bottom of the table. I think out of 7 ASEAN countries, we are 5th out of 7. But the second equally important wall or barrier is that there is high level of discrepancy or inequality in the level of teaching or the quality of teaching at schools in Thailand. Most of the schools with good teachers tend to be much more concentrated in city centers, whereas the majority of schools in rural areas tend to lack teaching equipment or teaching resources, or they sometimes don't even have enough teachers for every grade level. But then the third and final barrier or wall in getting a good quality education in Thailand is that even students who try to take matter into their own hands and try to access high quality learning content, even though they might not be able to get it at schools, they are faced with a very competitive tuition market, which often makes the tuition services quite unaffordable and quite expensive for most people. So what StartDee basically tries to do is to try and equal the level playing field by using technology to break down these barriers and ensure that no matter who you are in Thailand, no matter where you study or where you're from, as long as you have a smartphone, you're able to access high quality learning content.
Okay, so thank you very much for first of giving your personal background or reason for doing this. Is very interesting, and also your wider network in ASEAN, which maybe we were not that aware of, which is going to be very relevant, I think, also for our discussion today, since of course this is going to be the Southeast Asia Regional Forum, and ASEAN plays a big role in this. So yeah, you've outlined very well how you are addressing these gaps in Thailand's education system, and of course these were probably even more acute during the pandemic, as in most other countries, and you did start during the pandemic. So we have seen that education systems around the world were very slow to build online comprehensive learning systems the way you did during the pandemic. But in addition, and more generally, maybe we're also seeing that education systems may be slow to adapt to skills needs. So the content of what is taught, maybe especially in the digital area and ICT skills. So which role generally can sort of private initiatives like yours play in complementing education there and accelerating change in education systems? And how should national governments and also ASEAN work with the private sector and initiatives like yours?
Yeah, so I think as a private provider of online learning services, we have a huge responsibility to play during this crisis. And I think I want to separate my answer into what we can do in the short term during the crisis and what we can do in the long term post-pandemic. So I think during the crisis, as a provider of online learning, what we can do and what we have done at StartDee and as a group is basically offer ourselves as one alternative solution to learning at school. So when students cannot go to school to study, a lot of them have to rely on online learning. So what we did as a group was we launched an initiative called Online School across 3 countries, so Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand, where we live stream set of online classes that is available for everyone for free. I think this service has reached over 10 million students across the 3 countries. But I think even speaking as a provider of online learning services, I think it's important to stress that online learning is not a panacea. I think firstly, we have to be aware that online learning is not something that everyone can access, especially in these 3 kind of developing countries. There's still a segment of the population who are not able to access either mobile devices, access high quality internet connection, or even have enough kind of rooms in their houses to concentrate and study online. So I think what's important that we saw during the crisis is the government's ability to decentralize the decision making and try and see kind of which areas where students need to learn online fully, or if there are certain areas where the risk of the pandemic is slightly lower, where we can accommodate a combination of online and on-site learning. I think secondly, also, we also noticed that a lot of governments sometimes have a misconception that a good online learning experience is just a matter of copying what is happening in the classroom and pasting it online, when actually students' behavior while learning online and while learning in kind of classrooms are very different. On online, they have a much kind of shorter attention span. So we need to make sure that our kind of learning experiences and learning content are catered to that. So I think in essence, in the short term, we can be a temporary alternative to learning at schools, but that doesn't mean that governments should rely entirely on online learning, but they need to find a diverse set of potential channels or options for students with different needs and preferences. But I think in the long run, even post-pandemic, what I am hoping to see is that us as kind of private online learning services or providers can basically act as a complement to learning at school. So I think we don't see technology as something that is going to replace teachers entirely, but we see technology as something that can help complement teachers while teaching at school. And the question we really need to be asking is, what are the things that human teachers can do best, and what are things that technology can do best? And at the moment, if you look at the workload or things that teachers in Thailand are performing, you realize that actually teachers are spending too much time on activities or tasks that technology can do better, and they're spending too little time on tasks or activities that actually technology cannot do. So I think what's really important post-pandemic is trying to get the right balance. One example that I want to point out is this concept of a flipped classroom. So in a current kind of traditional classroom, a lot of teachers in Thailand spend a lot of time delivering lessons by giving kind of one-way lectures to students in the class, which means that the entire 1 hour of each class is taken up by a teacher kind of giving a one-way lecture. Now, if you look at what technology can help with that, you realize that actually teachers can record these lectures and send it to students to access before coming into the lesson. So then that frees up their time during the class to actually spend on kind of group activities or discussions, which actually are better at fostering the different skill sets that we want to see in students today, whether it's communication skills, whether it's teamwork skills or critical thinking skills. So I think in the long run, that's what technology can do. We can provide a solution that complements teachers and teaching at school.
But you've already mentioned that Thai students spend a very high amount of hours already on education. So once and when education systems go back to the normal, unless they adapt after the pandemic, there might also be a significant limitation for you there, as in that Thai students do not need more hours spent on private platforms, but as you mentioned, better education. So do you also need a certain openness for cooperation from the public sector or the official education system to accommodate you, sort of, in order to not just increase education hours further?
Yes, of course. I think what we are advocating is definitely not an increase in student hours. I think what we are trying to present as a case for this flipped classroom concept is actually switching what happens in the classroom and what happens at home. Because at the moment, students spend a lot of hours listening to teachers in class, and then they're set quite a high amount of workload or homework to do at home on their own. So what we are suggesting is actually flip those two things around. So actually the homework section becomes the task where students are able to access learning content to absorb the information beforehand. And then they go into the classroom and spend the time in the classroom doing group activities, which may be more productive for skills development. And it's something which actually teachers can do better than technology as well. So in a way, we're not advocating for increase in hours. And I actually think the pandemic has been a bit of a wake-up call for policymakers in Thailand as well, to realize that actually a lot of the lessons at the moment are a bit excessive in terms of the content burden. And actually there are a few things that they can cut down in order to make sure that students have plenty of time to learn outside school as well, in kind of everyday life.
Okay, so we already now spoke in depth a bit about new education methods or reshifting education methods in a more effective way and focusing on which supplier can do what best. But let's maybe talk a bit more in depth about the methods that you are using on your platform, because I have read that you are using interactive content and gamification to sort of really reach the Gen Z students. And you were even planning to introduce AI technology to suggest content that matches individual preferences and needs. So maybe you can talk about a bit more about that, and also tell us, as we discuss, as we are more generally, the future of education, hopefully post-pandemic soon, should such methods be adopted a bit more widely to also interest students in learning even more?
Yeah, sure. I think firstly, kind of our basic premise is based on the belief and the understanding that a good online learning experience is different from a good classroom experience. So that is very important in terms of the assumptions that we use to design our content. So for example, when we know that students don't want to be spending multiple hours consecutively staring at their mobile phones, we realize that we need to make our content a bit more bite-sized. So what we do is we kind of basically divide and segment all learning modules, all learning chapters and units into multiple kind of 30-minute long sessions. And we also notice that along the way, because of the short kind of attention span that students might have when learning online compared to in the classroom where teachers can interrupt and can make better eye contact, what we try to do is we try to add kind of interaction points along the way. So it's not going to be like one 30-minute long clip, but we try to kind of every 5 or 10 minutes, there might be a question that pops up to check if students really understand what has been taught in the previous 10 minutes. So I think, yeah, I mean, our basic premise is try to design what is best as an online learning experience. The second premise that we make, and I think this is a target for all types of education, is we believe that the utopia kind of learning experience is personalized learning. So it's a student-centric learning experience where the learning content, learning sequences, learning styles are adapted based on the student preferences and needs. So we notice that some students might prefer some subjects to others. Some students might be better at some subjects than at other subjects. Students might have different learning styles. Some learn from watching videos or seeing pictures. Some learn from audio or sound. So I think the utopia or the target of the best kind of education or learning experience is that personalized learning, because it will generate kind of better student outcomes in the sense that we are shooting content or delivering content that really answers to what students are confused about or what they do not currently understand. It also means that students feel that what they're learning is much more relevant to their needs, instead of kind of having to sit through something they already understand or being given something that is way too hard or way too advanced for what they have already understood. But getting that is something which is going to take a bit of time. I mean, I think before the kind of the world of technology, we normally rely on teachers to do this, right? So we rely on teachers to understand kind of the preferences and needs of each individual student. But of course, kind of relying solely on humans, number one is it might be prone to human error. There are always some things that maybe students don't express fully, and therefore teachers do not know. And it's also very difficult to scale. So if you look at environments in Thailand and ASEAN where class size is quite large, it's a bit too hard to expect each teacher to be able to kind of cater what they teach to each individual student. So this is where I think StartDee and any other kind of online learning platforms can help with, because we have a huge amount of data backend in terms of how each student is learning, what they're answering correctly, what they're answering incorrectly, and we can make kind of assumptions or calculations on what they therefore might not be able to understand yet, to make sure that we recommend the right set of content to those students. So I think, yeah, so in terms of personalized learning, this is where technology can help. But then I think finally your point about gamification, right? I think this is crucial as well, because if you look at the kind of the long-term trends or what we're seeing currently, in the sense that the world is fast changing and every piece of knowledge has an expiry date, it means that learning does not finish at school, right? So even after you graduate, learning is something that everyone has to do lifelong, right? So instead of kind of burning students out during their school years and then turning them off from any kind of additional learning, what we need to be able to do is to get students to feel positive about learning new things, to not feel bad when they do not know something, so that they have that motivation, that mindset going into the future where they're going to have to learn new skills and upskill and reskill themselves throughout their whole lives. So I think that's something which we try to do as well, and try to make study much less stressful and much more accessible and much more fun.
Yeah, I mean, that is very relevant. And I think this will also be a big issue at the forum, the aspect of lifelong learning, that education does not stop when you graduate. And so if we have students that are willing to continue learning and perhaps even expand such platforms for a lifelong learning process, that could be very helpful. I also like the point that you mentioned about data collection, which will then feed into the AI technology. Because in a way, yeah, you can assess way more accurately how each individual student is doing, but also how students on a wider scale are doing. This is almost like real-time PISA. So that might also be very insightful. And also, yeah, the methods that you mentioned already or have the potential to address, I think, many issues in education systems in Thailand. The divergence in teacher quality that you mentioned, but also around the world, really, where education systems, I think, usually struggle with the divergence in students as well, and whose issues to address. So this is really relevant, and also will probably be a potential solution to inclusion, which I want to talk a bit about more now, specifically also socioeconomic inclusion in education. You already mentioned this in your first answer, but maybe you can talk about this more in depth, because interestingly, actually, the OECD's PISA studies do find that the performance gap in education by socioeconomic background is actually lower in Thailand and in most other ASEAN countries compared to the OECD, even though the gap has increased between PISA 2009 and 2018. And yeah, as you already mentioned, your service is very affordable. I looked it up. So, and a package for one academic year is 3,700 baht, Thai baht, if I'm not mistaken, which would be around 100 euros. So yes, maybe you can speak a bit more about also on the financial side, how your services can reduce socioeconomic gaps in education, maybe not just in Thailand, but also in other countries in ASEAN and around the world.
Yeah, so I mean, we at StartDee believe that getting a good quality education is a basic human right? So it's something which all students across the world should be able to access for free. So in practical terms, like how do you make sure that everyone can go to a good school near their homes and get good quality education, right? So I think we at StartDee as a private sector is trying to play our part in trying to fix problems that have not yet been fixed by the government or by the public sector, while also being conscious that we are not on our own. We might not be able to eliminate all the levels of inequality and unequal access that we see in Thailand. And given that we are providing an online service, we need to be doubly conscious that it's a double-edged sword as well in terms of how much we can reduce the level of inequality. But I think it's fair to say that we are trying our best to make sure that regardless of what school you go to, you can access high quality learning content through our services, right? So even though we see in the statistics that there are about 15% of the student population that are not able to access mobile phones or smartphones, at least we at StartDee try to make sure that our services are available for all types of smartphones and devices. And that's also the reason why we spend much more effort in perfecting our mobile application compared to our desktop application, because it's a device that significantly more number of students, especially from lower income backgrounds, can access. But we also noticed that device is not the only barrier to getting our services. The second potential hiccup is actually internet connection. So we at StartDee have been working with kind of internet providers in Thailand to allow students to be able to learn through the StartDee application without having to pay for additional data costs. I think this is an important initiative as well to make sure that we make our services more affordable. And then finally, yes, you're right that 3,700 baht or 100 euros makes us kind of 10 to 20 times cheaper than other similar services at tuition centers in Thailand. But it can still be a bit too high for lower income students, especially in this pandemic economic climate. So what we do is we also work with corporates, donors, as well as schools who may be interested in sponsoring and subsidizing free subscriptions for these students. So that is kind of what we try to do from our side to make sure that our services are as accessible as possible. But I think if I kind of take off my StartDee hat and look at this as kind of from the whole system, I think we at StartDee alone cannot ensure that these services are accessible to everyone or can eliminate kind of inequalities that we see. But I think there are two other areas that governments need to be able to do. Number one is how do you make sure that every person in the country is able to access internet, right? We noticed during this pandemic, and not just in education, that the quality of lives of people who are able to access the online world is much higher than those who are not able to access it. So how do you kind of build up the infrastructure across the country to ensure that everyone can access kind of the internet at affordable prices? We saw, I think, a drive in Mexico where they actually enshrine the right to internet in their constitution to kind of put serious action in place to make that happen. We also saw in India where I think one of the states court interpreted kind of the constitution right to education by saying that a country cannot guarantee.
And the cost there, that how much cheaper your education methods are than conventional methods. But you also mentioned solutions that would still be quite costly, for example, reducing teacher workload, increasing teacher quality. So it might be worth knowing that Thailand and also other ASEAN countries are actually already spending a very high share of their GDP on education if you compare it to OECD countries. But this does not, as we have discussed, translate into proportionate educational achievement as measured by PISA. One reason is that you have a young demographic, and so spending per student actually remains low. So with what we have discussed, could a wider application of your education methods also lead to better results from the existing high education budget of Thailand?
Yeah, I think certainly we can contribute. I think two areas we can contribute. Number one is we can help deliver cost savings for the government. Right? I think it's fair to say that in Thailand, we have an issue with teacher shortages. As I mentioned, I think a lot of schools in rural areas actually don't have enough teachers for all subjects. So you end up having like a math teacher having to teach all other subjects as well, which may not be best for the students' learning outcomes. But even more seriously, we have some schools or small size schools in Thailand that don't have enough teachers for every grade level. So you have one teacher teaching grades 1, 2, 3 simultaneously at the same time. Now, so I think if we are able to adopt kind of these online learning services such as ours, I think what we can do is help deliver cost savings for that because of how kind of our services can scale up to across the country. It's probably more cost effective to use online resources to help with this issue rather than hiring kind of a high number of teachers in addition to what we already have in the system. So I think even though we can't replace teachers in certain areas or certain tasks where students will still require human interactions, I think we can help save costs on that. But I think the other thing we can do is help save time as well. Because as I mentioned, let's say you have a school where you don't have a teacher who's very adept at teaching English, having kind of our set of content that is available for students in that school, and having another teacher at the school who may not be kind of fully specialized in English, but can at least kind of show these students these English learning content and then guide them through or facilitate them through those materials. I think it's something which can help save the teacher's time as well, instead of him or her having to deliver the lessons himself or herself all the time. So I think these are two areas where we can definitely help with the government. But I think, again, taking off kind of my StartDee hat, I think the problem we've seen in Thailand so far is not that we have not spent enough money, but the problem has been more on where the money has been spent and how it's been spent. I think in Thailand, we have had issues with a lot of money being spent on administrative costs, which sometimes is a result of our quite excessively bureaucratic system. In Thailand, we also have issues with corruption, where some of the kind of the budget that has been allocated to education do not kind of fall directly into the benefits of students, but are lost along the way due to corruption, both at a central and at a school level. And I think in terms of how the money is spent as well, it's a very centralized decision-making process, whereby the central government decides what is best for schools and provinces around the country, which means that a lot of the time, the budget that's allocated for a certain school is spent on things that that school may not necessarily need. So I think if we can decentralize that process to allow school principals or schools in local areas to have a better say in how to spend that money, then that may make kind of our large budget much more effective in delivering better student outcomes.
So hopefully with potential reform in the current situation and driven by the current situation, we will see lower costs and lower hours for students with hopefully better outcomes. So yes, we've discussed a broad range of issues on education in Thailand and ASEAN, and I've given you some very specific questions. We've already now numerous times touched on the role of the public sector and the formal education system from which you need support and cooperation in order to fulfill your mission. So maybe to finish up, I'd like to give you some space to wrap this up and address policymakers, because as you can see behind me, the OECD's motto is better policies for better lives. So what would you like to tell policymakers? Yeah,
so I think we kind of often spend a lot of time talking about democratizing outcomes, right? So how do we design education policies to ensure that students are able to access high quality education, how to reduce the gaps in student outcomes between different socioeconomic groups. But I think in order to achieve those, or in order to democratize education outcomes, it's very hard to make that possible unless you also democratize the process of policy making, right? So I think in order to move towards kind of that end goal of high quality education for all, I think policymakers can also think about how they can start empowering kind of other stakeholders to become more involved and have a more direct say in education policies, right? Whether it's empowering local governments to have more powers in terms of selecting the teachers or selecting the personnel that come and work at their schools, have more power in terms of potentially tailoring certain parts of the curriculum to be more suited to local areas, as well as having more power to decide on how the budget is spent in a way that's most effective for their students. But beyond kind of local governments, I think it's important to also have the process of empowering teachers. So how do you make sure that teachers spend most of their time teaching rather than spending a lot of that time doing paperwork and administrative processes? And how do you kind of create a process or platform where teachers can have a more direct say or become more involved in the policy making as well? And I think finally, at the end of the day, if we want to deliver student-centric education, we should also create room to involve students as well in terms of policy making, whether it's their contributions or opinions on what is the learning content or learning methodology that is most effective for them, or kind of empowering and trying to gather opinions and allowing them to have a louder voice in policy making as well. So I think, yeah, democratizing outcome is definitely a must, but to get there, you also need to democratize the process of policy making.
Okay, thank you for giving us your insights there. And I see a lot of discussions right now on the need for more intense involvement of young people in politics more widely. So that extends beyond education for sure. Yeah, so thank you for all your inputs and deep insights into the education system of Thailand and the region, as well as your startup working on these issues. We will also have you as a panelist at the Southeast Asia Regional Forum of the OECD. So we will hear your views there as well. And thank you for expressing them today, and hopefully they will find their way to the policymakers in question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.